Hey everyone, welcome to Cinema Gulp and happy Halloween season. I'm Scott Howard.
And I'm his buddy Styles, and this is our first episode of It Was a Bloody Good Year. By the 1980s, the horror movie landscape had shifted away from classic universal monsters, iconic monsters made unforgettable by rich mythologies, which were based on history, lore, and classic literature. Now the studios wanted cheap, quick, and bloody. Horror had changed its focus to slashers, supernatural thrillers, and giallo imports. The classics were forgotten and lay dormant in a graveyard of horror cinema. But much like a curse, exactly 40 years after the Wolfman of 1941, the wolves returned to rule the night. 1981 brought us 3 unique takes on the werewolf genre. It was the dawn of a new decade, a decade searching for its own identity. The world was transforming right before our eyes into a more technologically driven world, leaving the old world ways behind. Transformation and crisis of identity are integral themes to most werewolf stories. It was also the beginning of the 80s excess, an excess and rapid change that can't be contained. So under the light of the full moon, let's talk about Wolfen Time 1981.
And joining us on our first episode of It Was a Bloody Good Year is Thierry Tiberius from the Cult Classic Movie Corner on the Fantasmagorium Network on YouTube. Hello.
Ahoy. And hello and hails upon thee. Hey, thanks for inviting me. I'm honored.
It's all fun in the werewolf community here, sir.
We're excited to talk about werewolves today. What was in the water in 1981 that we got 3 werewolf movies released within just a few months of each other?
I'm guessing there was a full moon, maybe?
That's a good idea. So more specifically about the Howling and Wolfen, they're both based on books. They came out in the late 70s. Howling was 77 and Wolfen 78. So it does make sense that just a few years after the book release that they would be trying to get these in cinemas. So at least those 2 being on track around the same time and being in production in the early 80s does make sense to me. The idea for American Werewolf in London, John Landis came up with that in the late 60s. He was working on some other film set and had seen some ritual going on in Romania, I think, or something. And that just kind of gave him the idea of a story about the undead and the occult, and started formulating that, and then wasn't really ready to bring it to screens until he had a bit more clout and could get a bigger budget based on the success that he had recently had with Animal House and the Blues Brothers.
The novel itself, from what I understand, was a much more straightforward, serious werewolf story. When Joe Dante got on and he was hired, he brought in independent screenwriter, the guy that he's worked with before, John Salas, to rewrite the script with a satirical sense of humor, self-awareness. Drastically helped this movie to me become more entertaining because it is a little slasher goofy-ish. That's what I like about it. But because it understands that, and because Joe Dante's sensibilities kind of showcase that, that's what makes it work for me. So as we get into our first movie, right off the bat, I really liked The Howling on my revisit.
I really like the whole setting of the main lead, the woman, going through a traumatic experience, and she gets sent to this camp, and it's right off the bat you kind of get a feeling that there's something very strange going on here. So it's kind of in a territory where you don't really know where the movie is going, and then it just gets stranger and stranger until the whole thing kind of unravels, and you kind of start getting an idea of what is going on. I like the kind of the blend of like drama and a little bit of black comedy, And when you see it several times, you there's more things that you kind of get. So it has layers. The old werewolf guy who wants to kill himself by the bonfire, which doesn't make sense the first time you see it, but when you like rewatch it and you know the ending, you understand that he's just tired of this whole get up. He doesn't want to do this anymore. He just wants it all to end. So there's a lot of storytelling going on behind the scenes. And I really do like the gigantic werewolf in this one, where my favorite scene is the office scene, where you have this dog soldier-ish large werewolf just going amok. The ending, I think, is really special, even though she turns into a chihuahua.
She kind of looks like this.
Yeah, she kind of looks like that indeed.
She is a chihuahua.
Cute little chihuahua werewolf. That's on the negative side. Having known Robert Picardo, who plays the murderer in this movie, for a lot of other movies he's done, I have a hard time seeing him as a menacing character. It's just because of the actor.
I'm a cowboy who's never seen a cow. Can rope a steer 'cause I don't know how.
He's become so typecast as like witty and humorous and being kind of not a dangerous guy. So when he tries to play a crazy killer, it just doesn't resonate in my mind.
One of the positives for me with this movie is the cast. So many great
Oh my God!
choices all throughout the cast.
D. Wallace.
Oh, yeah.
VP.
D. Wallace.
Dennis Dugan, filmmaker Dennis Dugan. Slim fucking Pickens is in this.
Yeah,
movie.
you even get Slim Pickens as a lycanthrope. I mean, who doesn't love that? But
Who doesn't love some Elizabeth Brooks with the creepy sex scene under the moon scene?
the Joe Dante staples like Dick Miller being
Dick
in there,
Miller,
he's got some
yeah.
great scenes. Always loved his line delivery. One thing I thought was pretty interesting with this movie that Dick Miller has a big part of is that it's kind of meta at times, long before everyone had the conversation. You know, everyone tries to point back, obviously Scream, but then some people point at, like, I think Friday 13th Part 6. Oh, it was meta before Scream. It's like, this thing was way meta, way before any of those. There's so many moments where they reference the 1941 Wolfman directly. They're watching it on television. They have conversations about it. There's drawings that look like they come from it. I don't know if you guys stuck to the very end after watching the hamburger burn. There's a stinger at the very end where they show a clip from the 1941 Wolfman. Like, just there's a clip
really?
at the very end of the movie. No. If you watch it,
I
all
love
the
the end of this movie.
The hamburger burning. But Dick Miller's scene where he's explaining the rules is very much like Jamie Kennedy's scene in Scream, where he's explaining the rules that we all know that come from horror movies. He even calls it Hollywood bullshit.
I'm gonna tell you all the rules to survive this situation.
And also the hamburger scene, it's almost as if she breaks the fourth wall, because she's looking at the waiter or like whoever is taking the order, but it feels like she's actually acknowledging the audience.
She totally is, and that's all Joe Dante and John Salas stuff that they added to that novel that I guess was just, like I said, very standard.
And then Roger Corman is in the phone booth, is the guy who jumps into the phone booth after the beginning. So fun little cameos from other, horror veterans.
And also there's the really fun thing about Roger Corman's cameo, because he goes in there and he checks the booth to see if there's pennies in there.
Yes.
And like Roger Corman he's known as, of course, a person who makes movies on a shoestring budget. Yeah. So that's like an in joke.
And if you don't his next budget,
if you don't know that's Roger Corman, you're sitting there going, "Why have they not cut from this scene yet?"
Yeah,
it's just like a nobody.
Who is this old man?
Yeah, for sure. One other cast member we all got to mention: Kevin McCarthy playing his UHF character, the TV station manager RJ Fletcher.
Oh, he's so great.
I love that scene where he's D. Wallace has just frozen on camera and they're like, "Get her out of here," and they put on a clip of him doing some editorial, and he's like, get me Fujiyama or Fujimoto, whatever her name is, get her ready for the 11 o'clock news. And he looks over at the clip of himself playing, he's like, "That's a real pro."
Every time I see, I mean, obviously Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but like He's kind of like subliminally this like icon when it comes to horror stuff, and he's great in cameos. But I forgot this is, I don't know if it's his first Joe Dante movie, but he's so great as what's his fucking name in Inner Space? Mr. Scrimshaw. Mr.
Yes,
Scrimshaw.
yes. Another I like its odd, quirky style. I think it's as we're going to talk about all three of these films, this one certainly has its own identity and its own style that is unique to this film.
Yeah.
The lighting is very stylistic. I think it does sometimes hurt the tension and scare factor, because especially some of the scenes in the woods with all the mist and the constant fog, it feels more like an 80s music video than something that I'm actually feeling like I'm enveloped in this wooded area. It just feels, even though it's real woodland, it starts feeling more like a set to me many times when they're out in the woods, because of the lighting and the use of the fog that just feels overdone in every scene.
And you have to mention the Ralph Bakshi moment during the lovemaking scene by bonfire, where it turns suddenly into like this rotoscoped cartoon. Because that's one of the things I've read about this movie, is that they had a really tough time with the budget. They constantly ran out of money, so they had to do like saving tips here and there, and that's also apparently the reason why you'd never see a wide shot of Dee Williams in the end after her transformation on air. You just have like the close-up of her face, because
I had heard that too, and it's kind of amazing that it ended up having a pretty moderate opening and decent success, like $18 million, you know, for what it is. It landed Joe Dante Gremlins, you know, from the success of it.
Yeah.
So I guess sometimes when you can pull something together, I really enjoyed this movie a lot more this time than I remember from my childhood. This is one of those early boner movies I had where it's like the sex scene I shouldn't have been seeing at that age. And I'm like, ooh, what does this feel? Oh my God, my positives, the creepy sex scene under the moon, the fucking, what's his name? Rob Bottin, creature design. Like you said, on that budget, and how the transformation scene had to be very close up and mostly on the face. And a lot, a lot of the same shots of the shirt ripping, they just reversed the side of it, and it was really well done. I love that it was more of like a slasher vibe with that cult compound setting. To me anyway, it was the most werewolf horror of the three, and that transformation scene is just fucking horrific. It'll give you nightmares, the bubbling eyeballs, like, you know, it's not to the level of the American Werewolf in London. Obviously, that's iconic. That still has yet to be beaten. But I did hear that Neil Marshall did take some of his creature designs from Dog Soldiers. In the wider shots of this one, they almost look exactly like the Dog Soldiers werewolves. Yeah. And it's really menacing and big, but you could tell if they had to linger on it too long, the animatronic pieces of it mixed with like the people they had in bodysuits, it would be too compromised. So they did a good job cutting those things, in my opinion. Here's the negatives. There were 7 fucking sequels to this movie, and they were pretty much just softcore porn. So I've seen a couple.
I have not seen a single one of them.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple.
I hear it's not, but this one is kind of very classic of what I would like to think of as a werewolf, or a wolf man. They should be on 2 legs, kind of, in my opinion. So I love the design of the final, once it's fully transformed, or even at the end when you have multiple of them, how sharp the angles are and everything, you know, the pointed ears and the elongated snout. And it probably has some of the best claws and fingers of any of the werewolf designs. Like those fingers, when it's lingering on that shot and it's elongating and stuff, all the pulsating, the transformation,
it's gruesome.
I think the transformation in this one is as good as the American Werewolf one. It's just the time it takes on camera for them to allow it to transform, and the fact that Dee Wallace stands there and watches it all take place before she does any action.
My thing every time I watch this movie.
That's what annoys me.
That scene, you're like, why did she not run out of there while this snout is taking 5 minutes to elongate?
I love the way it wraps up. It reminds me a lot of like They Live, with the TV broadcast in the world coming to this realization.
Yeah.
The way that when she's killed at the end, she's shot on camera by Dennis Dugan. Sorry, I wish he didn't survive this movie, because the fact that he survived, we have to sit through Jack and Jill.
I'm kidding. Are you okay?
Rick Baker was originally going to do this film, and he passed because he was given the opportunity to do the American Werewolf in London transformation. So it's interesting to see, like, what would we have gotten if Rick Baker actually was behind the transformation, but the person that replaced him, Rob Bottin, who went on to do The Thing, is the next best guy you could have.
Oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fucking amazing.
So,
yeah.
It still worked out in the end. So I'll jump into a few negatives. I've mentioned it. A lot of it has to do with the pacing of the film overall and the pacing of individual scenes. I think in the middle, when you have kind of the stalking, like the secondary couple, the TV crew, I don't even know what their names are or exactly what their
Like
jobs were.
They're
Dennis
producers,
Dugan,
I think.
like TV producers. I find it very strange that they're the ones investigating this whole thing instead of police actually going and investigating this. You're following these two, and it doesn't, to me, make a whole lot of sense of why they're the ones trying to solve the case, essentially. But all the scenes where she's like searching through the cabin before she gets attacked, and then his transformation, and chasing her into the office, and then even stalking her, as you said, him running amok in the office and finally getting her.
How did he hide in that office? How was he hiding behind that filing cabinet? That giant fucking...
Yeah, and his hand just coming down and like, I'll take that file, thank you.
That's a fun moment, but it all takes too long. That whole segment just runs on too long that you lose the tension, especially when she's searching the cabin. There's no tension for me anymore by the time you finally have the werewolf show up on screen. And that's really the first time you have kind of the werewolf. I guess you have the husband get attacked at one point too, but the movie, I feel, just takes a long time to really get to what we all want, which is seeing a werewolf on screen, werewolf attacks.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bummer that she survives the cabin attack only to be killed in her next scene. But I guess that's a horror movie, is like it catches you off guard a little bit. Because you kind of think she might be the survivor, and that's not the case. But that's what makes a good horror movie. No one's safe, you know. And in this movie, you really, with this 4 sort of main people set up, and then obviously what's his name turning in the fucking Tom Atkins lookalike turning into a werewolf pretty quick.
Because I feel the ending of this movie is a bit jumbled in the way that it's edited. Again, maybe it's budgetary to, as you said, Ben, not to show the full body werewolves too often, but that whole scene in the car at the end where they're attacking, it's such cut with such close-ups.
Oh yeah, they're not wearing bottom halves of those suits.
The classic pipe organ score that is used,
I love it.
It's so old school horror movie that it undercuts the tension in any scene that it's playing.
It definitely stands out. But I was kind of loving it. I think it was just the mood I was in. I was like, it does have an old-fashioned sense to it, and I kind of was enjoying that. But maybe it could have been more tense if it was a different score. But I agree with you on that. But it's a Joe Dante tense, you know.
Well, and Joe Dante was trying to find that horror comedy blend that he perfected when he finally got to Gremlins.
He was trying to find that perfect balance, but he couldn't. And I think that's the reason why some people see this as like a pure horror movie, and some people actually see it as more of a comedy. And that's strange to me, because I'm more towards the horror part of it.
It's definitely a horror movie.
I think they see more of the Dantisms, like the moment I mentioned with the werewolf kind of snapping this file out of her hands. That is pure comedy. And it's also like tying this to American Werewolf in London, which also is a movie that has a huge amount of comedy. So it's strange that 2 of the best werewolf movies in history, albeit in 1981, both have like heavy elements of comedy.
Maybe that's what makes it work. Maybe you have more dramatic and sexual driven stuff with vampires. I think what makes werewolf movies better is maybe that humor, because when you strip that away, you get like, you know, Underworld.
And when you go full comedy, you get Teen Wolf.
You get Teen Wolf, baby.
Another werewolf classic.
Jeez Louise.
I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I watched it again.
My closing thoughts, it's a howling good time.
Okay, now it's time to talk about our second film from 1981. This is Wolfen.
And to join us on our talk of Wolfen, is Mr. Fantasmagorium himself. Hey, Scotty.
Hey, what's going on, Ben?
Thanks for joining us, sir. I'm actually Scott Howard today. Thank you. I'm Scott Howard, star basketball player of High.
Oh, heavens. Where's Boof?
I think I went to school there.
He had Boof in his back pocket, and he went for that snaggly tooth looking blonde. I'll never figure that out.
Well, it was the 80s. Everyone loved blondes.
That's true. That's true.
Wolfen came out in July of 1981, July 24th.
First of all, I had never even heard of Wolfen until you guys invited me on. And so then I was like, Albert Finney, Tom Noonan, Gregory Hines. So I was already in for it. And also it was a barrage of actors and performers and like just people. Oh, that guy. So I was taken by it. It was a detective film. Albert Finney is amazing. Everything about this movie was just such a shot in the arm of awesome when it came to, we're meshing these genres together into what is quite possibly one of the most accurate representations of what a werewolf would actually be in North America. This is the North American werewolf in New York. I loved it.
I feel the same. The cast stands out so much. I think it's as you said, an interesting blend of different genres. It's not just it's hard to even call it a werewolf movie, a true werewolf movie, but it certainly fits the description, but also police procedural as well. And it does a great job of being that, a little bit of a mystery. I love all the different things that blend together to create this film.
It's definitely the police procedural of these three, and it's all the better for it. And the most interesting thing is, I guess the guy's name is Michael Wadley, the director. He actually, before this, he got famous, really, and it was kind of the only claim to fame was he did the 1969 documentary Woodstock on the music festival Woodstock, which I've seen. It's fantastic, but it's kind of a weird thing. And again, this is a book. I think they changed the name from The Wolfen to Wolfen.
Reads better as Wolfen.
Yeah,
it does. It really does. Yeah, and
it's cleaner.
And I agree with Scotty. I love the cast. You did leave out Edward James Olmos, sir, who's wonderful.
I left out Principal Strickland. Reginald Vell Johnson is in this movie.
He is as a coroner.
But the best character in this movie is Gregory Hines' hair, for sure.
It is so fun to see young Gregory Hines, rest his soul, both in the film and in real life. Spoilers both. But he was amazing, and he reminded me of Running Scared. It was almost like when that early sort of comedic spark that he had, charismatic to nothing, like so amazing.
Charismatic. I love how unbelievably late 70s, early 80s, this movie, it wears it on its fucking sleeve, man. Like I loved a time, I wish I lived in this time, where schlubby, like gross eating Albert Finney just shoveling an over fucking onionized hot dog off the streets of New York, just shoveling it into his mouth, talking to this beautiful younger partner with food spitting out of his mouth, just keeps turning her on more and more and more.
They do make a very specific effort to show that Albert Finney's character Dewey cannot be fazed by anything. He is in the morgue looking at cadavers, and he's eating cookies.
Yeah.
And they make a point of that later on. He starts talking about mutilations, and someone else is just about to eat a cookie, and they are put off by their cookie because Albert Finney had to go talk about gross stuff. So the introduction of, is it Diane Venora?
Yeah.
The actress?
Yes.
First of all, Foxy.
Super Foxy.
She is describing the mutilations of other people, specifically the shoving of cock and balls into the victims' mouths while Albert Finney is eating this hot dog. And I don't think it was onions. I think it was sauerkraut, which is even worse.
Yeah.
And it was boiled hot dogs. Oh my God.
I have to say though, I have been to New York. I have had those hot dogs, and there's nothing sexy about them. I think this is a movie that has, by some kind of Hollywood magic, actually aged well. I think maybe when it came out, it didn't quite work. They went kind of on the cheap with the werewolf stuff, just doing like a Predator-ish like point of view thing.
A Wolfenish. This came before Predator. They deserve.
I know.
They actually
it's the opposite. I know.
revolutionized POV with the way they work the sound design and some of the camera work. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
Well, no, and also just to be the third person to punch you in the face about this. And also I was like, why are they crediting the Steadicam operator in the opening credits? And then when I saw the Wolfen POV shots, I was like, oh, because that man's an artist.
It totally works, but this movie has the one thing. It's very different from the other two because it doesn't have a transformation scene, and you can't really count naked Edward James Olmos running around the river as a gaff peen. Yeah, well, the peen was there. The peen was strong with him.
And the nudity in this film.
They did a pretty good job of making sure we didn't see his peen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pubes though, and in the morgue there's just there's private
lots
parts
of
flapping
there's
all
lots
over
of
the
dead
place.
weenie. Yeah, there's lots.
There's boobs, there's nipple, there's side cadaver boob.
I love the opening of this movie with these sky shots of New York, and then you have him on top of the bridge, and he's like doing this strange thing with like a rope and a thingamabob, and it just sets the tone really well. James Horner did a great score for this movie.
You mean his Alien score?
Alien and Wrath of Khan score, because if you listen to this movie, if you listen to this movie, when the wolves come, it's kind of like Khan and Kirk battling in the nebula.
It is not kind of Khan. It is a direct lift. Like before they had his credit, and I was like, did James Horner do the score for this? Because that is Wrath of Khan. And if James Horner didn't do this, someone ripped off whoever did this.
They all do this, like John said. But we're talking about Wolfen, so we're talking about James Horner, obviously. But yeah, I was constantly hearing aliens.
Part of the reason that Diane Venora was there is because she's the psychiatrist for the CIA. And so, like, there's this entire, and it's kind of like the sleep clinic from Nightmare on Elm Street or something. And it just weird. Added, well, it is weird, but it adds another aspect of it. Like, they decided through the course of the film that this is some sort of terrorism, and they are pursuing that. And even when the truth is revealed, it's like, well, you know what? It's just easier to call it terrorism. So we're not going to expose the existence of werewolves.
I'd like to know how the fucking wolves get into the penthouse.
Yeah.
Magic,
Yeah.
Well, there's
fire
spider
escape, I guess, but
they're spider wolves. Apparently, they can scale, a high-rise building. Yeah,
I thought the script was really interesting and fleshed out really good. It just felt complete to me. But I mean, maybe, well, I'll get to downs later. But
there's all kinds of little details all throughout, whether it's dialogue or visual cues that are just fun little details, like when they're collecting the body of what I forget the rich couple at the beginning,
Vanderpeens or something.
They're collecting the wife's body. It's off screen, but her head falls off.
His head fell off.
They're like, hey, watch her head, and her head, you can hear the conversation between the two coroner guys. They're like, you pick it up. No, you pick it up. Like, that's a wonderful little detail. And so humorous. I feel like, to be honest, all three of these movies could slightly be classified as horror comedies. Finney's coming out after the sex scene, the night of the sex scene, which is the most unnecessary moment in the entire movie. But the sex scene, he comes out the morning after, and he sees this guy trying to ride the moped down the street and crashes it. Well, that's the moped of Tom Noonan's character, which just confirms for us he certainly didn't get away. He's dead. But that's a wonderful little detail to tie that together with no dialogue.
The movie is about outcasts and their place in society, and there is, Terje, you brought up the opening with Edward James Olmos on the top of the bridge doing like the sonic, like the, I don't know what you call it, but the making the sound by whipping something over your head. That establishes that there are multicultures in New York at that time in 1981. They do show the homeless population. It's part of the reason. people are being displaced, and they do establish with the indigenous people that it's like, well, maybe the ancestors who grew up within the parallels between nature and man grew to a unity, and now you have your technology and we have your waste, your human waste. Yeah. We are more in touch. There are no crimes, there are no lies, there is survival. And it does honestly open a little bit of a question as to whether Edward James Olmos's character was, in fact, maybe Albert Finney interrupted the transformation.
Well, unless I'm missing something, he puts the pill in his mouth and chews on it because they whisper, they give him something, and he walks off, and the other guys go a different direction. Albert Finney follows him, and he puts this thing in his mouth, and he looks like he's preparing himself to have to fight with himself to not do something. So I thought that he put that in there so he did not transform, but I don't know.
That's cool.
That's just my interpretation of it.
All those people in the bar, that's why we have such a large collection of wolves that show up at the end. That is the only thing that would make this aspect make sense, that they seek them out at that building, and even after they've fought them on the street and killed the police chief, that they go upstairs, however they get there, we don't know, to continue to follow them. Because if there's not an explanation where they actually knew them before, like being the people in the bar, then it's essentially the explanation from Jaws for the revenge, that these wolves just have some inherent reason to seek out these people.
Hang on to your socks, lads.
The entire movie starts with the destruction of a building, the breaking of ground, thusly the
Urban
desecration
decay,
of ground, urban decay, and all of that. But from their central base, which is the burnt out church, they do show, like, after Dewey takes Dr. Lady, like, in a hurry, because he has a bad feeling about this, he grabs her, runs out, and then one of the wolves, like, follows and does some decent tracking. Like, if you were to make a video game like that, it was almost Arkham Knight or Arkham Asylum level, sort of like flash vision. But there was a hunting aspect to it, and you got to see it from the perspective of the wolf, which I thought was interesting, really interesting.
Filmmaking wise, I fucking love the camera work. I love that steady cam. I love that POV. I love the filters they used. And most importantly, that sound design should have gotten them like an Oscar nomination. It was so good. Just that whole, when something comes together so well visually, and the audio, like when it comes together so well and it becomes such a big facet of the movie for me, which every time I kept watching those scenes, yeah, man. I mean, that fucking Steadicam operator deserved to be on the opening credits. God damn it.
The banter between characters, especially, you know, the introductions where you see various characters the first time they're on screen together, like Finney and his police chief or whatever. Hilarious stuff there, and really just makes them feel like they actually are friends, that there's a real relationship there. And then when you see him and his interactions with Gregory Hines, his interactions with Diane Verona, once, you know, he finally meets her, they move quickly to have a nice little banter and joke with each other. And I just love the dialogue all throughout this movie. I think it's really well written.
I do too.
Intelligent character building stuff.
But I don't really find this movie scary. Maybe a couple of scenes.
Not at all.
But I do appreciate that out of all these ones, every one of these movies has a different way of displaying the violence and the gore. This one's funny because they seem to sever everything. So it's a great camera and a angle and a great cut of a body part flying off of somebody through the air, you know, like a hand or a head or a foot, and then a splattering of blood somewhere. It works for this movie.
That final kill with the police chief and getting his head ripped off, and the fact that it's kind of choppily edited a bit, but you do get one quick moment of the head trying to speak while it's on the ground, which I thought was a nice little creepy moment.
But was perfectly set up, because there was that whole thing in the beginning of the movie in the morgue where Gregory Hines is talking about the
that scene was giving me anxiety, making me think about death. Like,
and then they show it. They show the police chief still alive, trying to say something, but he's watching his own body die.
Oh my God!
It was so just it came out of nowhere, and it was like, oh, I remember that part from earlier in the film. Thank you for setting it up and paying it off. It wasn't just a throwaway spooky line.
And that monologue penetrated me. Like, it was gnarly. And then to have it be a foreshadowing moment later, it's a tight script.
there are two moments in the film that I absolutely adored. The first one was the conversation when Dewey, Albert Finney's character, is asking for a lift home. She says, "Are you offering or are you asking?" He's like, "Asking." And she's like, "No." And so he says, "So you're walking?" And she's like, "Not tonight." And then his response is sort of to chuckle at it and be like, "Okay, I just got shut down, but that was a pretty good way to get shut down."
Yeah. He's like, I still got my Jack Daniels and my cigar. I'm a happy guy. I'm not getting laid tonight, but I'm happy.
I didn't get laid last night, so nothing's new.
I have cookies and booze.
I got cookies and sauerkraut and booze. Yeah.
And cadavers. And so then
I can cook my own sausage.
The use of New York City, I think the like you're pointing out, the top of the bridge and him having to walk up the whatever the pillars, the cabling or whatever,
with a clamped cable on,
with a clamp, and just so many other scenes. Even the intro, all that urban decay showing the destruction of that building. Honestly, I was watching that thinking like they really destroyed a building in that shot, and the church that they use through so much of this movie is directly behind it. Like that. Just thinking of the logistics of finding this location and being able to use it to your advantage the way that they did. But then the scenes in the park, I love that opening scene. I feel like, Ben, you mentioned there aren't too many scary scenes, but I think that opening is pretty intense.
Probably the most,
know exactly what's going to happen yet to these characters. But all the scenes in the park the next morning, the way the morning light feels, that's so real, and their breath and everything. I just think the movie does a great job of featuring the city, various locations. You get to see the towers a number of times, which is always great to see them, in all their glory. I love the way the city looked. Coming off of something like The Howling that didn't, everything's shot very tight and there aren't a lot of great visuals from the setting. This movie was just a breath of fresh air of just so many great exterior shots all throughout.
Well, and based on the year 1981, all of these films are from 1981. I was actually the first note that I took was Twin Towers. It's a time capsule for the decay that I heard about in New York, and when the rebuilding, and some people have called it the Disneyfication of Times Square and all this, and making it more family friendly.
I saw that as another kind of theme in the movie. I mean, the typical 80s horror movie morals is, no sex, no drugs. And a number of the victims in the movie, they specifically show taking drugs shortly before they're killed. And I wondered if there was a bit of that kind of 80s war on drugs.
But it was specifically paying attention to the fact that the werewolves were pure. They would not eat flesh that was diseased or tainted by.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that. Oh, okay.
Well, they said, there's a whole thing where Gregory Hines is saying, I don't even know. It took me 48 hours with all the latest technology to figure out that pancreatic cancer or emphysema, whatever, like these, the beast would not eat anything that was diseased.
Okay. Amazing.
Like there's a lot going on in this flick, and it depends on which avenue you want to pursue it through. But I thought it was very thought-provoking, while also and it did have Dewey's character. Like Dewey learns, he basically stops eating at the sight of death. He does become more connected to the world around him as opposed to disregarding it.
That's also a theme in the movie is, the new world pushing the old world out, and all these new technologies that are implemented, like the lie detector room or the night vision scopes and night audio things that they're trying to implement. And there's this whole security company that's supposedly very high tech, the surveillance company that's monitoring the Vanderveers or whatever. But none of that stuff helps them solve this. Basically, the old world is still the only way to solve this. All this new technology.
Going into that bar with all the indigenous people, was the scene for us, and obviously the scene for Dewey to if you let yourself in, you let yourself expand your mind a little bit, then that's when he kind of figures shit out, not through the fucking dreamscape machine or whatever that thing was.
The whole plot line with the terrorism, where it's rare for a movie to throw something like that in, and they dedicate a small amount of time in the movie for it, and then they just throw it completely out the window because wasn't that.
Well, and I appreciate the real world explanation of what was happening was not conducive to the facts of what the reality was. So like what they wanted it to be was not what it was, but they wanted to create that to have the tension, which speaks to the spirituality of being connected with. There are no lies. There is no crime. It is survival. And so stop backhanding us. Just be straight up, straightforward. And I think that's one of the things that Albert Finney sort of sees, because he had been so callous to the world around him. It's just like, no, there are things going on that you can't just toss off as being, you know, oh, people are assholes.
And as anticlimactic as I guess some people were saying the ending was, I was like this, hoping that was going to happen. And it wasn't going to be just, well, I know all this information, but I'm still going to shoot these fuckers. You know, like I loved it that the bullets coming out of the gun. I was like, thank you. A smart leading man.
The FBI and the terrorism plot. I feel like that it serves its purpose because it helps bring in the psychologist, the Diana Verone character, to the story. But since we know as a viewer, I feel like everyone kind of knows this is a story about something natural, a wolf, and not a terrorism group causing these murders. It seems pretty clear early on in the script that it is an obvious red herring. So I'm not that interested in everything that's going on around the terrorism plot, including these scenes of interrogating people in the lie detector room. Those are the scenes that fall short for me. It feels like it continues on all the way to the end to be a setup to keep the rest of the police force helping Finney go after the real threat. They're off doing something completely separate.
I agree with John here. I think, and the whole aspect of the lie detector machine thing, camera stuff, it kind of takes me out of this 80s cop thriller setting, and it kind of dabbles into the sci-fi realm, and I just think it's unnecessary.
And the movie kind of starts with that image, so you're like, what the fuck is this?
And they never revisit it, so it's pointless almost.
If they have all this technology, why didn't they look into it? And it was like, well, because they didn't want to. They did what they wanted to do. Finding out the truth wasn't their business. As cynical as Dewey was at the beginning, he was revealed the truth by the end, and it shook him as a character.
My only real negative, it's not so much as on the story, is it because I talked about how I really thought the camera work and editing was really good. I have some pacing issues with some of the scenes where I think they were going to get very intense, and then they just dragged a little too long. The scene in particular for me was the Gregory Hines death scene, where not the death scene, but the entire set piece.
The lead up to that, yeah.
The sniper guns where nothing fucking happens, and it just takes forever and ever and ever. And I was starting to actually fall asleep because I was sitting on my couch in the middle of the day. It was kind of like a stormy day, and I was dozing off because it was taking so long. I had to keep rewinding because I'm like, oh shit, did I miss something? That's the one scene that stood out to me where I was like, God damn it. This could have been so much more intense and interesting, when in the end, the only thing that happens is our beloved Gregory Hines is ripped apart.
Yeah, Ben, I felt the same about that scene, but very specifically that scene is one that runs on a little too long.
Yeah.
And I really hate that the movie does a good job of being a smart, somewhat realistic presentation of this story, but why do we have to have the overused horror trope of the body falling out of the rafters onto Albert Finney, Gregory Hines's body, perfectly timed in this entirely long scene that's way too long. At the right moment when he walks under the body, it falls on him. Like, just such a horror movie trope that was a bit cheesy.
There was no true werewolf transformation scene. I felt like I was like, oh, so they're just gonna be wolves. Okay. Second thing, when they shot at the car at the end after the police chief, like, it blows up for no reason.
Yeah.
I was like,
action.
No, I actually kind of agree with Ben with the pacing. I really like the movie, but it does sometimes like slow down and it doesn't really go anywhere. So it maybe like if you cut like 10 minutes out of the movie, maybe the pace would be better. It's like 10-15 minutes. Well, that's a lot, but maybe do some trimming. It would be better. And as much as I do like an ending where you're kind of left thinking about what actually happened, I would have liked the ending to be a little more clear, because from my perspective, it seems almost like the movie itself doesn't know what it's been trying to tell you.
I guess his plan to show solidarity with the wolves is destroy the model of the new development that would have been made in their area, to show, hey, we're going to give your land back to you. We're not going to continue to encroach on you guys. And he destroys the model. And I always think of the scene where in One Crazy Summer, when the guy's dressed as Godzilla and he comes out crashing and smashing the model. So I kind of just was thinking of that while watching that scene and having a nice laugh. But the ending makes no sense to me. It's the biggest letdown of the movie. It's running so great up until 10 minutes towards the end of the movie, and then it just kind of it goes for weird action moments like an exploding car and wolves that can scale a building that doesn't make sense.
A center for ants.
A center for ants.
Actually, they're not monsters at all. They're just really conservative architects.
They're guardians of the planet, and maybe that's why I forgot my third, is that I am looking for negatives, and I was actually just blown away by this movie, and I don't have three. Maybe I got 2 out of 3, and that ain't bad.
Definitely one of the most unique, if you want to classify it as a werewolf movie and compare it to these other 2 films from 1981. It's one of the most unique.
Hell of a year, a good bloody year.
All right, we have come to our final film of the 3 werewolf movies of 1981. This one, I think, is considered the most classic and most loved of the bunch, but let's see what you guys think. This is American Werewolf in London.
I love John Landis most of the time. The way I love Frank Oz. Versatile, unique, funny, also gets great performances out of people. What's his name? David Naughton. He's a fucking national treasure because of this movie. And if you want to 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon him, he actually was in Midnight Madness with Michael J. Fox in the 70s. Michael J. Fox played myself, Teen Wolf. So there's a werewolf connection right there.
This was the second time that I've seen, preparing for this, the second time that I've seen an American Werewolf in London. I enjoyed it much more this time. The first time I thought it was too comedic. This time I thought it was perfectly comedic, because the terror sort of every time that I thought that this is just a John Landis comedy and they've decided to make it a werewolf. And then you see something absolutely startling and jaw-dropping, and the transformation scene to the gore of the murders to the crazy cult at the slaughtered lamb. Everything about this movie is a perfect ebb and flow. It's a roller coaster of comedy and horror. I would put it up with the best of them. I would put it up with Shaun of the Dead as a perfect mash.
This movie, I really like it. I also one of those movies I've owned this a couple of times on DVD, and now I have the Arrow release on Blu-ray. Now it's coming out in 4K. I don't know if I'm going to do the upgrade there, but I've seen this movie a handful of times. I also think it's a perfect blend of comedy and horror. And it has one of the best jump scares ever that actually made me choke on some candy when the first time I saw it. And that's the scene where he comes out of the dream where the Nazi werewolves have attacked his family, and the nurse goes to open the blinds, and the werewolf Nazi comes out and stabs her. The loud sound there, I choked on a piece of candy, and I had to have some help.
So I got to ask the group here, Ben, starting with you. How old were you when you first saw American Werewolf in London?
I think I was 13. I remember seeing it in 1991.
You were a teen, okay.
Yeah.
Scotty?
I was like 32.
Okay. Terje?
Early 20s.
Early 20s. Okay. I was 7 years old when I saw
Oh,
it.
dude, nice. Good work.
Hardcore.
So for me, this was a horror movie first. I didn't even know that any of this was supposed to be considered funny. Griffin Dunn's character being killed on the moors was pure nightmare fuel for the rest of my life, still to this point, essentially. Him screaming, it's killing me, is why that scene is, I mean, there's so many reasons why that scene is really effective, but to hear him say that as his friend is running away from him, just affected me. Like I couldn't shake that. And then when you get to moments like the dream sequences, which for a 7-year-old, I didn't even really understand what a dream sequence was supposed to be. And you have a dream sequence within a dream sequence, one where you have children watching the Muppets. And then these murderous Nazis come in and kill the whole family. I was shaken to my core. And for that to be the double scare, unlike almost any movie has ever produced since then. I mean, you guys are pointing out how effective that was. For me, it rocked me. I those two scenes, the killing on the moors and that double dream sequence scare, never left my mind since I was 7 years old, and is the reason why this. If people ask me my 10 scariest movies, I wouldn't put it at the top 1 or 2 or anything, but I probably would have always included this in the top 10 scariest movies. Now watching it as an adult, I can get beyond a lot of that stuff and find so much of the humor.
It was life-changing at the moment.
But it was life-changing at the moment. And so this movie holds a very special place in my heart. It was hard for me as a child to walk home from my local park if it was dark without feeling like I was being stalked by this werewolf, specifically this werewolf.
I kind of breezed through it on my first viewing, and watching it recently, like last night, that first act is so eerie and so spooky and so good, with everybody at the slaughtered lamb. Who's the commandant of Fury 131?
The guy from Alien 3, isn't he the guy?
I don't know their names, but yes, it's the guy from Alien 3 that gets pulled through the ceiling.
It's Brian Glover.
Yes, Brian Glover.
That's it.
Is it murder? It's up to God now, in reference to allowing Jack and David to go out into it. And it's like, we can't let them go. And it's like, well, if they don't go, they'll live and they'll tell everyone that we have a werewolf. So they gotta die. And ultimately that community coming together and being like, no, we have a responsibility to our fellow man, I guess. And going out and killing the lichen that is out there to make sure that these boys don't die. Too late, but
he was
they tried.
Probably their friend. Most likely their friend, someone they knew. So
that's what I was thinking. Yeah, it's just this point in the movie, because my favorite part of the movie is the first act. I love the whole movie, but my favorite, I love how the countryside is used. It's beautifully, like you said, it's also eerie. It hasn't really gotten comedic yet, but it still feels like it's there, because Jack and David are just kind of goofy characters. But that opening scene, because, I mean, fuck, dude, my whole life I wanted to backpack through Europe. Boy, does that make you not want to, right? And not because you're in fear of getting attacked by a werewolf, but you're like, fuck, anything can happen,
If you have the opportunity, play the opening credits, and then on some other unit put on Cat Stevens' Moonshadow, because the opening titles were actually edited to that song, but then they couldn't secure the rights for it, so they changed for the song that they're actually using in the movie. And they didn't change the editing, they just changed the song. So the editing fits perfectly for Moonshadow, but not the song that they're actually
using. It really needed that additional moon-related song, because by the time you hear Blue Moon for the third time in the film, it's played itself out. The atmosphere created in that opening scene on the moors, the way their wet jackets, the rain, the their breath and everything, visible breath, you really believe how cold and damp, and that this is the moors of England.
The cinematographer was Robert Painter, who did all of Landis's movies. And he did Superman 2, he did The Big Sleep in the 70s. But to me, this is the best shot movie he ever did. It just all came together so well. And the whole movie shot beautifully. But man, when David and Jack are walking in the blackness, it's just fucking perfect. And he co-directed and shot the Thriller video. So it kind of makes sense why that video works and is so fucking creepy.
I wanted to bring that up because the similarities, obviously you've got Landis and this other guy you're talking about working on it, and Rick Baker doing the effects for it and stuff. But the little mix, this movie does set up kind of the zombie look, and the werewolf look, which you both get in the Thriller video.
When you're in on the porno movie theater thing, in the actual script for American Werewolf in London, that scene was supposed to take place in a kids showing of cartoons in London. So in the original script, the wolf was actually supposed to like maul children towards the end.
The clip that they show is it's just a classic Punch and Judy show. It's a fun regression of society. That's a paraphrasing of what Kermit the Frog says. Like, it is juxtaposing the glee that you get from watching violence to the glee that you got of watching, Tom and Jerry or Itchy and Scratchy beating each other when you were a kid. The thrill of it. And I think that that's something that John Landis does very well in terms of heightening the excitement through it's fun. Is it?
I'm glad it stayed in the porno theater, because then we get those couple times that they cut to the screen and show you what's happening in that porno movie. It's this. Okay, full disclosure, I don't watch a lot of porn, so I'm sure there's some. If I say that's one of the weirdest porns I've ever seen, you guys would probably say,
I've seen weirder, trust me.
Everything just goes batshit crazy, and it's all just werewolf shenanigans from the point that all of the victims, Jack, his best friend, is gone. No one is there. He's turned into the werewolf, and it's like, you're on your own. All right. It's just going to be werewolf stuff now, kind of like watching a porn.
Wow. I didn't know where you were going with that, and it really. Wow, that's totally correct. Your story is over, and now it's just David dealing with what's going to happen, not knowing what's going to happen, and then dealing. That's the craziest thing about this movie, because like I said, I saw it when I was about 13. So for me, it was technically more of a comedy because of its tone. It was scary, but I just always found it kind of joyful and quirky. But ultimately it's a tragedy, and the ending shot is a fucking downer, which is so weird to build up to that. Yeah, well, I'm talking about the shot, not the music.
No.
Yeah, well, no, and how great.
But even the music,
how great does that juxtapose it? Like it's wonderful. Perfect. Yeah, it's like when they play like peaceful hippie songs in Vietnam War movies. You're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
We gotta get out of this place. If it's the last thing we ever do.
It almost feels a little short, because you've kind of only just began the story of him being a werewolf, and then you come to this point, which in a normal movie would maybe be like the start of the third act.
Yeah, he doesn't last. Suddenly, it's not a very good.
It's over.
One aspect of the story that fills the time, since we're not going to get to his transformation and him going, all wolf till the very end of the movie, essentially the third act. Griffin Dunn's character, and his purgatory that he's dealing with, the curse of being unnaturally killed, and he's undead until the werewolf that killed him is killed. Like, I love that little element, but the victims of a werewolf being in this limbo and undead, I really love that aspect of the movie.
I did too.
Griffin Dunn,
yeah, it's like the ultimate guilt trip.
Yes, it's kind of like a survivor's guilt for sure. Like when we look at it in a real essence of, if somebody survives a traumatic experience where their friends or loved ones or acquaintances have died, there's this survivor's guilt where they feel like maybe they shouldn't have survived either, and they play that beautifully in the movie.
Yeah, they do.
But his character popping in all throughout, it plays into the comedy so well, but it's also super creepy, and I really just love the concept of undead people in limbo and all the people in the theater that come to him at the end, his actual victims that he's now created, and their ideas for how he should off himself. It just works with the balance that this movie has created all along of horror and comedy, both at the exact same time and working perfectly.
His dead friend, he just plays it very
Griffin
down
Dunn.
to earth. Yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm here, deal with it. I'm just gonna tell you a couple of things, and his friend, the main character, is of course reacting with like shock and disbelief, and he think he's going insane. So it works so well with the juxtaposition of him being terrified and the other character just being very mellow. It's kind of like he's having a discussion about how the weather is, or how your favorite sport is going.
You get an actor like Griffin Dunn, and you get that character of Jack, who who is the first and most gruesome victim of a werewolf and dies kind of at the beginning of the movie, he gets to continue on as a character and be in some of, like, I agree with John, some of the best scenes in the movie. So you get more Griffin Dunn and you get more Jack and you get more of them two together, which you only got to establish at the beginning, even though it's now in this very deranged way. I loved that. And I think the movie would be missing so much if some of those elements weren't, if their conversations weren't part of it.
When it came to David was very much like, he didn't pounce on Nurse Alice. It wasn't until Nurse Alice rescues David several times throughout the film.
She made the first, second, third, fourth move. Like, Nurse Alex was all over his junk. Like, he was oblivious to it for some point.
She's very unprofessional.
American dream is like, you're a single guy going through Europe and this hot British nurse wants to take you home and cook for you and you all weekend.
The doctor who ultimately investigates what's going on with the lycanthrope theory of David's story, investigates the slaughtered lamb and gets the same warm reception that David and Jack got. He believes David to a certain extent in terms of what is happening, how he is feeling, the psychological profiling that has been happening with David. And I do like to hearken it back to the horrible thing that you guys thought in Wolfen with the established reality of how things are moving forward, how that was the dismissive nature of the werewolves. In this one, the doctor is like, maybe it's werewolves.
This film has meta moments as well, where they specifically stop down and talk about 1941's The Wolfman. There's a whole conversation about that. And so, again, another movie that is having its meta moment long before that was so popularized by Scream.
Okay, so you guys have seen sex scenes before, right?
Sure.
No, never.
Okay, so from what I understand, based on this film particularly, and also from others, what you do if you're going to make love to a lady, or if you're a lady and you want to make love to a man, what you do is lather, hug, and rub. That is all they do.
It's a new mating ritual. Yeah, that's the sex scene. They kiss each other. Well, they also kiss each other's shoulders, tops of their shoulders.
You know, specifically, I'm going to talk about the werewolf design and how this one differs from the Howling and whatever else we've maybe seen. This one being on all four legs. It looks like a giant ass bear, which I love. I mean, that image right there is pretty accurate for how fucking freaky the face of this thing is. The bulk of this thing, the viciousness that it displays in the various attacks, and its howl are key to why I think it's the best werewolf ever brought to screen. That howl stands out like no other. It has like a pain. You can feel, you can hear the pain in the voice of the howl, and it's unlike a regular wolf. I just love that aspect of it.
To me, it's just one of those things where it's one of the most important like scenes in cinema history, because it made it real. It's totally real for me. And then I tried showing it to my ex-wife in regards to me doing this show and talking about it, and she was like, "Oh, that's so unreal." And it's amazing. Rick Baker really did a magic job there.
And they created a new category at the Oscars because of this movie and the effects work he brought. The makeup effects Oscar did not exist before 1981, and he was the first recipient.
Do you feel it's been trumped since then, John? Do you feel there's been a better one? I can't think of anything that would stand out quite as much.
Well, there's a lot of like more modern werewolf movies from 2000 and beyond that I've never seen. Maybe some of those have some pretty great transformations.
Most of them are CG though.
But the one that should have been Rick Baker coming back doing the remake, I think it was 2010 or something, of The Wolfman. That one should have been able to stand out as his update with real practical effects. And
I still thought it looked good. It looked hokey in some shots, but it was pretty good.
So much CGI that it doesn't stand up to what he created 20, 30 years before, or whatever it was.
No, I know I blab on about sound design, but talk about something that really makes the effect come together full circle, where you have to sell that image, because remember, you're shooting on fucking celluloid, so they're not using sound when they're creating all those things. It's like, think of like an artist doing stop motion. They're just placing the camera in a certain area and they're doing their effect, and later on someone adds in all that additional stuff to make it immersive, and that's what the sound does. And like, just the fact that you have David, his body in the floor, and like they just create this giant werewolf body kind of popping, who knows how they did that, because those people are geniuses.
It is the best transformation werewolf scene of all time.
Fuck yeah.
Like, because not only does it show the transformation of a man turning into a werewolf, but it also shows that, like, some people, like, there's been a romanticization of classic film villains like vampires and werewolves and what have you, but it's not fun being a werewolf. This isn't a superpower. This is a curse.
And I think that's why this transformation, above everything else, above makeup effects, above sound design, what makes it so different is it's a man not knowing what the fuck is happening to him, and his facial, that's why he's a national treasure, because he fucking just owns this movie and he owns this character and he owns that scene, man. Like, if you think of the Howling, the transformation in that is from people who already know they're wolves and they're just transforming into wolves. That's still great, but it's body horror. It's fucking total body horror. He's like, oh, yeah. Like, it's what the fuck, so unbelievably painful, like, to have your body stretch. You remember when you're 10 and you get growing pains, like, and you're like, I'm sore.
Show me that smile. Show me that smile. Don't waste another minute on your crying.
A werewolf story at its core is body horror, and very few of them have really brought that to the screen in the way that body horror, like a Cronenberg style body horror that we're all familiar with, had brought to the screen. So this and the Howling, but this most especially, brought that real aspect of body horror, and it'll linger for all time. That transformation sequence deserves to be considered one of the best moments in body horror cinema ever.
And also, I don't wish migraine headaches against anyone, but I'm just saying, anyone who suffers from migraine headaches, if you get like one that is an instantaneous light, if you'd like to entertain yourself during excruciating pain, just wonder, am I turning into a werewolf?
I'm going to use that from now on, dude, for sure. Even when I have a stomach cramp. Oh, fuck.
I'm turning into a werewolf.
I'm turning.
Well, I'm going to start with Scotty, because you didn't get to join us for one of the films. So out of the two that you did get to see, which one is your favorite?
I'm a big fan of soundtracks, so I do love and I appreciate being introduced to Wolfen. I like it a lot. It is a close silver medalist to my revisit to An American Werewolf in London. And yeah, so that is my favorite, because it reminded me of why I enjoy werewolf movies. If Wolfen had a solid transformation scene, or at least a lackluster transformation scene, I would have gone with Wolfen. But no, based on the transformation of David and Nurse Jenny, I'm going to go with American Werewolf in London.
My ranking order is, my first place is American Werewolf in London. I hate to be so cliche and go with the movie that everyone thinks is the best one, but it's...
Well, there's clearly a reason for that.
Sometimes it's because it's actually the best one. So, yeah. It's so well made, and you can watch it like several times, and I'll catch like small things I didn't catch earlier. Like this one, I saw it this afternoon, and next time you see it, I don't know if any of you noticed this, but right before he transforms into a werewolf, he opens the door to the apartment and out of the apartment building, and he just walks inside again. And that's a very small detail, but that's because his self was knowing that he was turning into a wolf. And my second place goes to Wolfen. I think it's very original in its style. I enjoy the Howling, but yeah, it's gonna get third place in this lineup. I think Wolfen is one of those movies that it gets a lot of people like Scott here hadn't even heard of it, and it's a shame because it's a lovely movie that more people need to see. So
I have American Werewolf in London way fucking higher than either of these movies. So that's number one, 100%. It's one of my favorite horror movies. Watch it every year on Halloween. These next two, it's tricky because, as I know, Wolfen is a better movie than The Howling. It's a better made movie. It has a better script. It has better direction. I got to go with The Howling because I want a horror value, and I barely consider Wolfen a horror movie. I guess technically, I mean, it is, but not as much as your traditional horror movie. The Howling hit me more on the scares and the atmosphere and the frights and the funny self-awareness of Joe Dante. So I found it more enjoyable and easy to sit through the Howling during the Halloween season, where my mind shifts and wants kind of hokey sometimes and out in the open, blatant stuff. So where I know Wolfen is a better movie, I go with The Howling as number 2 for this show, for this 1981. It was a bloody good year. I got to go American Werewolf, Howling, Wolfen. But I love them all. I thought they all were great. I hadn't seen The Howling in years. So
I'm right there with you on the filmmaking of Wolfen standing out to be, in my opinion, better, and the screenplay and the wonderful small details that it has that makes it stand out over The Howling. And I had some issues with The Howling and its editing, and basically on some of the filmmaking levels I have issues. So my ranking is going to be The Howling in third place, Wolfen in second, and American Werewolf in London as the top one.
Yeah.
And like Jay said, it's I'm not picking it because of the cliched choice there. For me, it really scarred me as a young kid, and I will never outgrow my feelings and my first experience of seeing this movie, which is great. You need to have those movies in your catalog that you saw that scarred you, whether they will as an adult or not still. They made their impact as a child, and that's an important thing to help me grow into being a horror movie fan or a movie fan in general. And it's such a unique film with its blend of comedy and horror that it's always so, rewatchable and has its place in history and horror cinema that no one will ever be able to supplant. So top of the tier for me is American Werewolf in London. But I want to say thank you guys for joining us on this first show. We hope, this is hopefully going to be an annual thing because we're starting it on with 1981, and that makes it a 40-year anniversary for all of these films this year. So next year we're hoping to do 1982, 40-year anniversary for whatever we come up with as a theme for that year. So maybe you guys will be back to join us on that one. But thank you so much for being here today. Loved all your comments and your thoughts on these movies. Scotty, if you get a chance, check out The Howling because it is worth your while to see it. Just never rent one of the sequels is what we've heard.
Thanks for asking me to come.
absolutely. It was a pleasure having you, Terry. Scotty, it was a pleasure having you back. It's been a while. And you could see Scotty on the Fantasmagorium channel here on YouTube. And Terry, your show is great. Cult Classic
Classic Movie Corner.
That's a mouthful, and I love it.
A place where you can be safe and unsafe at the same time.
Love it. This is such a great place to hang out and talk about movies and the things that we like. And also, you know what? It's been a while since I've seen Albert Finney's ass. So thank you.
Yeah.
On that note, thanks everybody for watching. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, share, like, comment, subscribe.
Thank you all. This has been a pleasure, and we'll see you all next year.
Oh, I suck at that.